I'm just gonna wait for one more classmate to connect, and then we're going to continue. Doña Cita, solo. Sorry. For the last time then, we're going to start then. You can go to the chat here in Zoom and you can link on the Nearpod link that's there, right? So these are the students that are connected in Nearpod. If you can't connect, don't worry. This class today is just to practice. We're going to be using Nearpod for our theoretical classes. And also because I want you to see how this tool works, right? Since this is a material design class. Good. Give me 1 second. Just adding some classmates. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we're going to start with today's class. If you go to the Nearpod, you're going to see the presentation and you're going to be able to interact with some questions that I have. So we're going to start off with a question. And it's, what are materials in a language classroom? Okay, so I want you to go there and I want you to answer the question. The question is, what are materials in a language classroom? So you can answer the question directly in Nearpod. Are you able to see the question?
I can see the question, Ms. Brenna, but how do I get to answer?
You just click at the bottom. Right there, you have a space to answer. Let's see if we have any answers. Not yet. Okay. Sandra says that books are materials. Good. Okay. Are tools that a teacher uses, I guess. Alba says books, textbooks. Sanelli says pencil, paper, book, colors, notebooks. Okay, I see here. Bessie says tools that we use as teachers to help the learning process. Okay, Norma says the board can also be a tool. And Alexi says that it's everything used to help teaching.
Miss, I don't finish my answer.
Yeah, I know.
Neither did I.
Sorry, because I clicked share. So also materials, there are components. Yes, some of you won't be able to answer because I clicked share. I'm sorry. Okay, but if you see, we have different answers that have a variety of options. So that's interesting, right? That's very interesting. All the different views that people have according to this question. So the next question. The next question says, what type of materials would you use in a language classroom? Okay, so now I'm not gonna click answer immediately. I'm just gonna wait for you. So what type of materials do you expect to use in a language classroom? Okay, I see some answers. Jackie says pens and pencils and something to write on, such as paper or a notebook. Very good. Flashcards, poster boards, word banks, slides, board. Very good. I'm just waiting to have all the answers to start sharing. Very good. I see more answers here. I don't want to click on them until everybody has answered. Very good. Excellent. Caitlin says that anything that is printed or electronic, paper or a notebook, list, vocabulary, maybe says videos, recordings, worksheets, construction paper, scissors, book, speaker, data show, flashcards. I see flashcards, video, audio lectures, PowerPoint presentations, digital books. Very good. Textbook, speakers, board, notebook, flashcards. Excellent job. I see very good answers. I'm gonna start sharing them because of time. So you can see there, Hosem's answer. He says that it can be newspapers, magazines, pictures, flashcards, realia. Marjorie says notes and lists of vocabulary. Norma says notebook, pen, pencil, book, slides, and computer. Caitlin said printed or electronic resources. Annie has handouts, worksheets, textbooks, computers, and so on. Alexi says paper or notebook, list of vocabulary, phrases, etc. Video recording. So look at all of your answers, right? They're not down to one thing. They're very varied, and that tells us something that is very important that we expect to learn in this class, okay? That materials are more than just a book, because in life as a teacher, you're going to go to work to places, especially if you work with the government, where people are going to tell you, come, you're going to be our English teacher. So this is your list of students. You're going to be teaching these grades, and that's all they're going to give you. They won't give you any materials at all. So as teachers, we have to be ready for that. And we have to also be ready to know what to use in the case of the lack of resources. Yes, you will work at places that will give you so many materials that you won't know how to use them, but then you'll also have places that will give you materials that won't give you enough or anything at all. So today we're going to talk about principles and procedures of material development. And you can follow the presentation here, or you can follow it on Nearpod. So it says that most people associate the term language learning materials with course books because that has been their main experience of using materials. So a lot of people panic, like I said, when they tell them there's no course book. And oh my goodness, what am I going to do? How am I going to teach this class? But no, right? Materials go beyond that. And as it says here, it could obviously be videos, DVDs, emails, YouTube, dictionaries, grammar books, readers, workbooks, or photocopied exercises, handouts, right? Also, as some of you mentioned, it can be realia as newspapers, food, exercises, food packages, photographs, live talks by an invited native speaker. I can invite a native speaker to my class and he can easily become a resource. Instructions given by the teacher, because sometimes you don't take materials to the class. You just tell students things to do. So that also becomes a resource. Tasks written on cards or discussions between learners, all of these are materials. So in other words, they can be anything which is deliberately used to increase the learner's knowledge and or experience. I'm sorry, I have to take a call. So, as I said, then anything that you can think of could be a material. So let me hear you. Let some of you open your microphones and think of something that is unusual that you think could be a material in a language classroom. Let's talk about that. What would be something unusual that you would take to a class? Can anybody help me? What would be something unusual that you would take to a classroom and you would use? Open your mind and participate. Something that comes out of your mind that would be something that teachers don't usually take to the classroom, but that you think would be useful as a resource.
Animals?
An animal, yeah, you can take, maybe you can have a pet day. It depends on how, if your students have pets or not. Something else?
A plant?
A plant, yeah, we can take plants. If we're talking about the parts of the plant, if this was a science class, or maybe it can be an English class talking about plants. Someone else?
Miss?
Yes, Fabiola?
Maybe clothes?
Clothes, very good.
How about Miss Brenna, when we don't take things to the classroom, but we take the class somewhere else, field trips?
Also.
Miss Brenna, you could also take a data?
Yeah, yes, of course. Some of you mentioned it. What else would you take?
We could take fruits.
Yes, fruits, any type of food, right? So I can tell you an experience with first graders. I had a group of first graders and we made baleadas in the classroom. Of course, we already had everything pre-cooked and everything graded because they were first graders. But the idea was them to learn how to put together a baleada and which were the steps right? So this is very important, right? So anything that I can use in a classroom that is going to help me increase my students' knowledge and or experience of the language. So I can take a movie, and even if this movie is not oriented to teaching languages, it doesn't matter. I can take a part or an extract or an excerpt of a video, of a series, of a movie, of whatever. But the point is that the resource or material that I choose has to have this aim, right? Increase the learner's knowledge and or experience of the language. And that's very important. So materials can be instructional and that they inform learners about the language. So that would be like a book, a handout, anything that informs the students. Also, they can be experiential in that they provide exposure to the language, like a video, like an audio recording, anything like that. Also, they can be elicitative in that they stimulate language use, like cards. You have games, board games that have students speak. If they don't speak, then they cannot participate in the board game. Or you have conversation cards. There's some conversations called Sally conversations. And these are situations that a person is going through and you have to give them advice. And so you read the card and you have 2 or 3 minutes to think about it. And then you have to give that person advice according to the card, right? And real-time advice, not advice that's so weird or that wouldn't be real. So those can also be types of materials. And also they can be exploratory in that they facilitate discoveries about language use. Maybe this is a handout that you're going to have students use the language without really telling them what the grammar is or what the form is. And then students are going to discover it as they work with the handout or the worksheet or whatever we're using. So we have to make sure that whatever resource or material we take to the classroom is useful for the student and it takes students to any of these levels, right? It can be instructional, experiential, it can be elicitative, and also exploratory. So these materials in this area can be very, very helpful. Now, who can help me thinking about one type of material that would be instructional? Let's see who can tell me. You can open your mic. A type of material that can be experiential. I'm sorry, instructional, sorry, instructional. Instructional, sorry. A video, yes, a video can be instructional. What other ones?
Magazine. A textbook, teacher.
A textbook is also instructional, very good.
Worksheet, Miss.
A worksheet, in this case, yeah, a worksheet can be instructional because by practice we can learn. Very good. Now let's go into the experiential. This has to provide exposure where students are exposed to the language. So what would be an experiential resource that we can take to the classroom or use in the classroom?
Teacher, an audio,
An audio,
a cassette, or a microphone.
yeah.
A
What-
game.
A
Yeah,
game.
visualize, because it's something that they can visualize and like on the
A
chart.
video, yeah, a chart. Very good. Now,
A
Slide,
script for drama.
yeah, very good.
like a slide as well, teacher.
Yes. Miss Janet mentioned earlier that we can also take students on field trips. Of course, in Honduras, that's quite difficult because we don't have places where students are going to speak in English, right? Like a museum where they're going to speak to students in English. Well, maybe now we do. We can ask the person in charge of it to speak in English, but usually it doesn't happen, right? But like I said, this is an opportunity for students to experience the language, okay? And then we have, well, we already said elicitative. I gave you some examples. These can be conversations, handouts with conversations. They can be conversation cards, board games, anything that takes students to speak, that asks students to speak or to give a response or to write. Because remember that the productive skills are not only speaking, but also writing. And then exploratory, anything that helps me explore the language. Very good. So in your opinion then, what is material development? I'm gonna give you 3 minutes so you can go there and you can answer. What is material development in your opinion? What is this about? So go ahead and write it in the chat.
I have to have the student.
Once I get a 50% of participation, then I'm going to share.
A problem with writing on the platform. Can you help me, please?
Just click on it. If it doesn't work, don't worry. Don't worry.
I want to write it on the chat.
Yes, you can write it in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, I already have some participation. I'm going to wait for everybody to participate so I can start sharing. Okay. Very good. Okay. I'm going to read the ones in the chat. It says, is to create materials, Bessie says. Itzvan says tools or ways to share something specific. Okay. Sandra says that it's the creation to help learners. Good. I see over here materials that help improve students' learning. Dynamics, games. Marjorie says teaching resources. A process to practice, Lillian says. Very good. Excellent. So as I was saying, materials provide easy way to learning to students. But remember the question is, what is material development? Because this class is about that. So what do you think we're going to be doing here, in other words? Right? What do you think this class is about? The way you use materials for students learning? That's a good answer, Alba. Everything that helps students to learn in the class and develop their knowledge. Very good. Miss Jana says that it's to take certain resources and use them to create materials that will be used in class. Very good. Bessie says to create and design. Very good. Alexis says that is to select the correct material for the creation of teaching, I guess. Very good. I'm gonna wait for a few more participations. Very good. Very good. Isban says that it's the process that contributes to teaching and learning. Olga also says that it's the elaboration of material needed to develop a class. Very good. So I'm going to share some of the answers that are here in the Nearpod so you can see them. And it says, Alba says it's the way you use materials for student learning. Marta says that it's when a teacher plans, create, design some resources and materials. That's excellent. That's an excellent answer. Sandra says it's create to help the learners. Also, excellent answer. And then everything that helps students to learn in the class and develop their knowledge. This is an answer by Astrid. Linaida also says that it help the students to understand a topic. Jennifer said that materials that help improve students' learning. Alexis said that it was to select the correct materials for recreation. Very good. You have very good answers. And this is what we're going to be talking about and doing in this class, because this class has little theory to go around, right? And mostly we will be doing practical work. But first, of course, we have to go through some basics in information that is important for us to follow. Very good. So then material development, what is it? So it's both a field of study and a practical undertaking. Luis? So what do we mean by a field of study? Well, it's going to study the principles and procedures of the design, implementation, evaluation of language teaching material. So not because somebody made this material means that it's the best material or it's a material that you should use. As a teacher, since there's a wide variety of materials out there, you should be able to study that material and to see if it's really adequate to your students' needs, level, to the objectives, to the aims, and so on. So that's why material development is a field of study, right? Maybe it doesn't have a 100% scientific area, but it does have some principles and procedures that we must follow. Then also, as a practical undertaking, it refers to anything which done by writers, teachers, or even learners to provide sources of language input, to exploit those sources in ways which maximize the likelihood of intake and to stimulate purposeful output. So this is a lot of information, as you can see, but it's very crucial, right? Because who can create materials? Well, writers, teachers, learners. And why learners, you can say? Because students can create their own posters. Students can create summaries of a text. And so this becomes a resource, right? And students can create a lot of materials in the classroom that become part of the learning process, right? And in this case, we're looking to create input, but also in order for us to maximize that students have opportunities to create purposeful output. So we're not only worried on materials that help us give the students information, but also materials that are going to help students show what they have learned. And so that's why it focuses both on input and output. So that means that you have a lot of work to do as a teacher. You have to create materials that are going to provide students with information, and also materials that are going to help evaluate what students have learned or to see their performance in the language, okay? In other words, Tomlinson says, the supplying of information about and or experience of the language in ways designed to promote language learning. So students will always have that opportunity to promote through the materials. They should have the opportunity to learn, practice, and use the language. Not only again, to learn, right? Because to learn is just to take in, but also to make use of. So ideally, according to Tomlinson, two aspects of materials development are interactive. So yes, these two areas, they're different, they're separate, but they can be combined. So as a teacher, I can study a material, and then there are certain amount of procedures that I can do in order to apply the practical undertaking of material design and development, okay? So that means that the theoretical studies help inform us on what things I should take into account. And then according to that, then I'm going to develop the materials and make use of them in the language classroom. And we're going to see that we're going to learn how to adapt, how to simplify, and how to do materials according to all of these principles and procedures. Also, it says that material developers might write textbooks, tell stories, bring advertisements into the classrooms, express an opinion, provide samples of language use, or read a poem aloud. Whatever they do to provide input, they do so ideally in a principled ways related to what they know about how languages can be effectively learned. So it's not that you're going to create this material just because. This material is created around the approach that you are using, the method that you are using, and the goal and the aim that you want your students to achieve at the end of the class. You cannot choose something just because. Even if you choose an icebreaker or a warm-up at the beginning of the class, it doesn't mean that that icebreaker is going, and just because it's not related to the topic, it doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. It's still an important part of the classroom because what you're doing there is that you're trying to cope with the other skills that students have, like the affective skills or the social skills. So it's very important then that we take the process of material development very seriously as teachers, okay? Then we have material evaluation, and this term specifically refers to the attempts to measure the value of materials. How good is this book? Every 5 years, the English program gets together to evaluate the textbooks that we're using in the levels. And they decide if we have to change or not, or if we have to change editions. For example, right now we're using the Macmillan books. They're skill-based. And there will be a moment where teachers come together because I think we have been using them like 3 or 4 years now. So maybe next year is the last year. And so the teachers of the program will come together and they will start evaluating these materials in order to value them, to see how significant they are in the process of language learning in the English program. So they're going to see the level of the students achieved through the materials. And then there are another set of aspects that we have to take into account when we evaluate a material. Not just because I don't like it, because maybe I'm a lazy teacher and these books have a lot of information and a lot of things to cover. And so I said, I know I don't like those books because that's too much work from the teacher. That's not a valid point or idea of which I can say, no, well, we won't use this book anymore. No, right? There are some guidelines that we should follow in the process of evaluating material. And that's why it says, in many cases, material evaluation is done impressionistically. So what does this mean? That we just go by the impression. Oh, look, it's very colored and a lot of pictures and wow, it brings this and brings the other. But what happens when you just work on the impressions? Then sometimes you may have problems, right? You may have problems because you won't be able to really focus on other things, important things like the curriculum or the objectives and how this adapts to it, okay? And usually this consists of attempts to predict whether or not the materials will work in the sense that the learners will be able to use them without too much difficulty and will enjoy the experience of doing so. So some schools, what they do is whenever they're going to evaluate a new material to use, they ask students perception and they ask students if they like the book, what they like, what they don't like, were they easy to use. There is a complete survey of questions that could be asked to students. So again, to evaluate a material is not just to evaluate it. I remember when I got my first job, the second year, I was the coordinator of first grade teachers. And the first thing they told me, okay, this year we're changing books. So go meet with the book people and choose a book. I mean, that's a heavy responsibility. So I remember I went home and I was like shocked. And so I started searching on the web on what things I should consider and everything. And I tried to do my best in the selection of the book. I invited the rest of my colleagues in order for them to help me choose the book. And then we made a list of things that we would like the materials to have. And we selected a very good textbook because we were selecting textbooks for language arts, that is called, that's reading, spelling, language, and phonics. And we selected a very nice, it's not a textbook, but it's a group of materials. So it was really interesting because it had so many resources and everything. But like I said, it's not something that you're going to take just because, or maybe because they're going to give you gifts or they're going to give you materials. Because one year they told me in the school that they selected materials just because the editorial group was going to give them 3,000 lempiras per teacher for the teachers to use in Bookmaster. And you know that Bookmaster is like the heaven for teachers, especially language teachers. And so everybody was happy because of this. And so they didn't really look at the books. And then when they realized that they were putting together language arts instead of separating the classes, they realized that the books did not connect. Phonics had its own vocabulary, spelling has its own vocabulary, and it was a mess, right? Imagine first graders with so many vocabulary words to learn. So again, the process of material evaluation cannot be taken just because, right? You cannot do this just because I want to, or because I like the colors or the pictures, or because they're going to give me a little gift or money, right? No, it has to be something well done. So in this particular scenario, we're also going to be talking about language teaching. But in this case, we're going to focus on the process of teaching, refer to anything done by material developers or teachers to facilitate the learning of the language. Okay, so this can include the teacher standing in the front of the class and explaining a direct speech. It also could include a textbook providing samples of the language used. It could include a textbook inviting learners to reflect, or the way they have just read a passage, or it can include the teacher providing the vocabulary of a learner needs, participating in a challenging task. So there's a lot of things that we're going to consider teaching, but in this way, we're going to focus on that practical side of teaching, okay? It's not that we're not going to focus on planning the class, but we're going to focus on the practical side of planning. What am I going to use to do this? So if my lesson plan says that I'm going to write on the board, then I should know what I'm going to write and how I'm going to write it. And what else am I going to use to write this information? Or if it asks students to come up to the board, what are students to write or interact with? What are they going to use? And so other things. So the process of teaching in the material design spectrum is all about the practicality, what the hands-on things that I'm going to be using in the material and resources that I'm going to be using at that specific moment. Also, we're going to understand that teaching can be direct. That means that I'm going to be transmitting the information directly to students, or also it can be indirect, that I'm going to help learners discover things for themselves. And maybe I'm going to be a little more proactive and students are going to be more hands-on. Also, it can be preemptive, and that means that it's going to aim to prevent problems. So I'm going to see beforehand, what if my student asks me this, and I'm going to have materials ready for that. And what if students say this? So I'm going to have different types of resources in case there are problems. Also, it's going to be facilitative, And that means that I'm going to help learners do something. And in this way, they're going to be very practical and working and constantly moving and participating. Also responsive, where students are going to use a lot of output. They're going to respond by using the materials. Or remedial, right? What is remedial? After you have applied some type of assessment and you realize that there are some gaps or that students don't know a certain topic or that students need to improve on something. So as you see then, language teaching is going to go nowhere far from the things that we have learned. Okay, it's going to be according to the materials, it's going to be according to the methods, to the approach, to the assessment, to the outcomes of the assessment, and all the things that entail a language classroom. Because sometimes we just say, no, I'm just going to choose materials. I'm going to go to a website and download a lot of worksheets. But what is the purpose of each of these worksheets? And do these worksheets really connect with the task that you have at hand, that you planned in your lesson? And the ideas and the outcomes and the objectives that you have created. And then how do we see language learning in this process? Well, we see learning is normally considered to be a conscious process, which consists of the committing to memory of information relevant to what is being learned. And what do we mean by this? The students have to be able to recall what they already know and put it into use, okay? Spelling rules, conventions of greetings, vocabulary items can be useful for the language. So we can also have that available for students. And also that we have to understand that language learning consists of subconscious development of generalizations that sometimes students are not going to be able to understand, that there are exceptions in some rules, for example, and they may generalize. So then through the materials, I should be able to help students to stop making these generalizations. Like I said, that they add S to all the plural words and know that they learn that sometimes I add ES and sometimes IES, right? And also it's going to be both conscious and subconscious development of skills and strategies. So sometimes I'm going to teach students something and they're going to learn it at the moment. And sometimes it's going to take more time until students internalize it. And then it shows in their communication. So we're going to see language learning as both, right? An unconscious and a subconscious process, and materials have to help us elicit and continue developing these two types of development in students. Also, we're going to see that we're going to have explicit learning, where the language are aware of when and what they're learning. We're also going to have implicit learning, where learners are not aware of when and what they're learning. They're just doing things and naturally acquiring the language. And then we're going to have two types of knowledge. Declarative knowledge, that this is knowledge about the language system, like the rules, the grammar rules, and all of this information of maybe vocabulary definitions and things like that. And procedural knowledge has to do with how to use the language, with those conversation activities, role plays, and all kinds of activities to take students to put the language into practice. So putting this together in explicit of both, an explicit learning of both declarative and procedural knowledge, this helps learners to pay attention to features of the language, like input, and helping them to participate in planned discourse. So in a way, when I do explicit teaching, I want to include both types. And the same happens when I do implicit language learning. Now, how am I going to create a systematic evaluation of materials? Well, most of the well-known materials, writers follow their institutions rather than an overspecification of objectives, principles, and procedures. So the institution where you work is going to tell you what type of materials, what websites you can use. if you have liberty to use any types of materials, then you will have to create your own principles, objectives, and procedures for finding materials or for even creating them. Because imagine that you create a poster with a lot of marks and a lot of things, and no, right? You have to be able to create materials that are meaningful for the process, okay? It says that some textbook writers who sit down and identify the popular and successful features of their competitors, and they can clone those features and they avoid unpopular and unsuccessful features. This happens a lot in the language books that we find. You're going to see that most books have a lot of things in common, like conversation models, conversations that are very robotic, like, hello, how are you today? And conversations that are not natural. But it's because these things are popular. So since everybody's doing it, then most textbooks have these patterns. And so this is part of a process of evaluation that textbook writers do, right? In order to try to make their books very commercial. And that's why, again, I want to repeat this, we're not going to stick to using a textbook always, because textbooks tend to be very commercial. You're going to find some textbooks that talk about Japanese culture, and you're like, but we're in Honduras, right? We're in Latin America. So why the names of the people are Rio and Joko, right? But it's because these textbooks were probably targeted at that specific Asian culture, that part of the world. And so when the commercial sellers, because they come to your schools and they start telling you, no, this is the best book, and they don't think about the contextual side, the culture, that it's not relatable, right? They're going to talk about religion in their point of view. They're going to talk about culture in their point of view, food, etc. And students are not going to be able to identify themselves, right? Now, one of the problems of using a systematic evaluation of materials is that it needs time, right? It's going to control you have to know how to control your learners' motivations, right? And it also lack of out-of-class motivation, because you don't know what's happening outside the classroom, and students are really enjoying the materials or not. And so it's really difficult. And also the learner and teacher rapport, right? Students usually don't give you feedback. Rapport has to do with that good communication between teachers and learners. And students usually don't give you feedback on materials. Students just do it. And it doesn't mean that you're going to tell me, Miss, I didn't understand that material, I didn't read it. No, the type of report that is good to receive from students is that students tell us, I did the assignment, I used the material, but it was hard to read. The print was, the letters were too small or too big, or the text was too extensive, right? But I did the assignment. Because that's why it's a difficulty, because students usually say, if you tell them, okay, let me know if you like the material, students have 2 points, right? They really liked it because they want to, as we say, quedar bien with the teacher, or they didn't like it, they pretend not to like it at all, so they don't have to do the assignment. So it's really difficult to come up with an idea of how to evaluate materials, right? And it says that we also have to unite second language acquisition, research, and materials development. SLA is the theories, is all the research that has been done over the years. So it's very important that we take it into account. And Tomlinson makes out 5 principles that we must take into account when we create materials. First, learners should be exposed to rich, meaningful, and comprehensible input of language use. Remember, this is a theory made up by Stephen Krashen. So we have to make sure that the materials I choose are comprehensible input to use the language. Another one tells us that language learners who achieve positive effect are more likely to achieve communicative competence than others. And this has to do with a theory about the affective filter. So if these materials make students motivated, then the affective filter is going to go down and they're going to be more and more participative and they're going to acquire the language better. Then it tells us that learners can be benefited from noticing salient features of the input and from discovery on how they are used. So students can also learn naturally if we really show students how useful these items of the language are and so on. And then learners need opportunities to use the language to try to achieve communicative purposes. This has to do with the use of communicative skills. So if students don't use the language, if we just take students' materials for input, and we don't provide materials for output, then students are not really achieving the goals. And that's another principle that is very important. And finally, second language learners should use mental resources which they utilize when acquiring and using their first language. There has to be some similarities. Of course, we're not going to teach by syllables because English is not syllabic, but there are some things that students use in the process of learning their first language that can also be applied in the second language, okay? So today we're going to stop here. And for the next class, we're going to continue with this reading in order for you to see how the process of language learning and material development are widely connected, okay? Because what I want you to understand is that there are a lot of things that we're going to do with materials that you may thought that, why did I have to think of that? Or why do I have to do this before I think about this? Because the process of material design cannot be something that you just took out of your sleeve, right? Or just something that you woke up in the morning, I'm gonna do this, right? No. Also, I'm going to be including Nearpod in some of the sessions so we can be able to have access to the materials and also so you can interact in a different way with me and also for you to explore this app, okay, that is also used in the process of teaching. I don't know if you have any questions so far about the topic or comments that you would like to make. No? Well, if you don't have any comments, then write your names in the chat. I see some of you are already doing it. And I'll be seeing you in our next class.
Thank you, Miss. See you.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Thank you, Miss Brennan.